Hi, everybody. Welcome to the Kidney Coach YouTube channel. I am naturopathic Dr. Fiona Chin, co-founder of the Kidney Disease Solution and head formulator at Genesis. And I am joined again today by the amazing Jessianna Saville, who joins me from the US. And she is the founder and the head renal dietitian over there at Kidney Nutrition Institute, which is an amazing organization dedicated to those diagnosed with chronic kidney disease and also PKD. You do a lot of work with PKD. I know that's a big interest for your team over there. So she heads a team of renal dietitians who really are great at thinking outside the box and treating you as a person, not a disease. So I'm always very grateful, Jessianna, to have your wisdom and knowledge, and anyone from your team onto our podcast, but especially you. So thank you for joining us today. I really appreciate it.
Love to be here. I feel like I get a chance to kind of pick your brain for a little bit every month. And so I save up all my questions for then.
Well, that's good. Yeah, Jessianna and I always have a great chat before we jump on. So today we've got a really cool topic. We wanted to talk about protein in the urine because we know that's actually something that a lot of people look at, and people want to know what its relationship is to kidney disease and all of those sort of things. So we thought we'd dive into that today because there's some great things that you can do to treat it, both pharmaceuticals through diet, and there's some herbs very specifically for it. So I'm going to hand over to you, Jessianna, but let's just start with, what is protein in the urine? What is that? Why is that something that people might want to know about?
It's a good question. Now, most of us don't think about our urine very much other than just hydration, right? How dark is it? Am I hydrated or dehydrated?
Yeah.
Until you get kidney disease, and then suddenly your urine becomes very indicative of either how your kidney disease is going or what's changing or whatever. People are like, my urine is bubbly, my urine is different, and I'm getting urine tests. And what do those mean? Proteinuria, or protein in the urine, is a really incredibly important marker if you have kidney disease to pay attention to. The reason why it is, and it's just protein in your urine. So our kidneys are this beautiful filter. They are an amazing filter in our body. But when one of the things that they hold on to and that they help balance that they can help balance is protein levels. And so when our kidneys start becoming inflamed, and I wish I had a good diagram to show you this, but some of the protein that is in the bloodstream, it starts kind of leaking out of the kidney structures into the urine. And so people then will have protein in their urine, which is a very bad sign. If you have protein in your urine, you definitely have some active inflammation going on in the kidneys, and you're causing inflammation too, because protein in the urine will cause that as well as be a sign of it.
Yeah. And you were saying before, and maybe we'll dig into this, that, because often people are looking at EGFR and creatinine levels as markers or hallmark markers of how their kidney function is. But you were saying to me, and I sort of had heard this and I'd sort of forgotten about it, that you actually use the level of protein in the urine as a marker to determine how aggressive, active kidney disease actually is. So do you want to just talk a little bit more about that for people, so that people realize that it's not EGFR, creatinine? You're sort of looking at it as protein in the urine, and then maybe those guys underneath as tests.
Yeah. No, this is actually a really, really important piece to understand. So GFR and creatinine are where it seems like a lot of decisions are made. And so it's where a lot of people hang their hat as far as, my kidney disease is bad, my kidney disease is okay, it's getting worse, it's getting better, is they put their hook on GFR and creatinine. And while those trends definitely teach you something, protein in the urine is very compelling to use as a marker. KDIGO, which is the International Kidney Guidelines, they have something called a heat map. And the heat map has two parameters on it. One is your GFR, and this is a staging, like what stage are you and how fast will you progress. So one of the parameters is your GFR. And then the other parameter is how much protein is in your urine. And what you see when you look over, they call it a heat map, meaning the hotter things are, the more likely you are to progress. So you'll see it goes from like green to yellow to red on this chart. And people that have more protein in their urine, you see it very clearly, they're going to progress faster to end stage kidney failure. So for example, just give you an example, it's important. If you have stage 3 kidney disease and you don't have any protein in your urine, you are not at a high risk of progressing quickly. And, maybe you just stay at stage 3 for like 40 years versus someone who's stage 3 and has a lot of protein in their urine. They could progress down to end stage kidney failure. I mean, they'll just drop GFR function super duper quick. And so that protein in the urine is a really critical marker of determining how fast your kidney function is potentially going to decline. Some of the papers that I've read on this highly encourage, and I would say that this is a gold standard marker for sure. When studies are done on kidney function with any intervention, that proteinuria and or albuminuria, that those things should be looked at as a critical endpoint in the study, because it's so much more exact or precise about what's going on as opposed to just GFR and creatinine. So it's for any patient, right? It's really important that you understand where you are. Do I have a lot of protein in my urine? Do I not have a lot of protein in my urine? Like, where am I at on this, like on this spectrum? Because it can give you, and not only can it give you a good marker of tracking how your interventions are giving you success, but also can give you an idea on how fast you might be progressing.
Which I think is super important information for people to know about the aggressiveness of their interventions and feedback of their interventions working. So can you dig more into, so obviously we're talking about tests now. What I see all the time in clinical practice is we get a nice eGFR, not a GFR, so we get an estimated glomerular filtration rate. We get a spot, it's just a spot test and it's a blood test, of just what it's looking like. Now, talk to me about 24-hour protein in the urine and albumin tests, because they're obviously very different and they're not routinely done. And probably for what we're talking about here, we're talking about really a 24-hour test versus a spot, right?
Yeah, that's a good question. So if you go to get your labs done for your doctor, they'll order the blood work, and then a lot of times they'll order a urine study. And usually what happens is you go into the lab and they give you, I'm going to draw your blood, and then they give you the pee cup and you go pee in the cup and then you send it out and they analyze it, right? That's called a spot urine. That means they took your urine just from that time and they're going to analyze it. There's, now I know some people are going to disagree with me about this, so I'll just give you the background on it. The problem with spot urines is especially, there's a lot of different things that can be problems. Number one, how hydrated you are. Number two, what time of day you are. Number three, like just based on activity, a spot urine can be kind of all over the place, especially on proteinuria. So, and I actually had a nephrologist teach me this because I could not understand this. But so it'll say like 3+ protein in your urine, or it'll give you actual numbers. But the spot urine generally is used by a nephrologist to pick up on if there's anything really big that's going on. But it's not actually super duper accurate because of all those different things that I shared: time of day, what you ate just right before you got it, a lot of different things. So I personally feel like the gold standard, and I love for my patients to have this as a baseline, is to get a good 24-hour urine, because even the amount of protein in your urine can vary at different times of the day. Yeah. But if you have a 24-hour urine, then you have a really good baseline of really where where you're at. And so I really like for my patients, if they've never had a 24-hour urine before, to go ahead and get that. Unless they don't have like, I mean, in a spot urine, if they have absolutely no protein in their urine, then maybe it's not relevant. But if this is a relevant problem for them, their protein and their urine is 2+ or 3+, I would 100% get a full 24-hour urine, because it could be a much more exact marker to me on progress over time. And you can start tracking that trending with interventions that you take on.
Yeah, I totally agree with that. And we were talking before. So if you had, say, stage 3 kidney disease with some protein in the urine, how often would you want to be running a 24-hour test?
So for me, if I am assessing an intervention, then I want to have data to know if it's working or not. So if I say, hey, you just get diagnosed with stage 3 kidney disease, and you're like, whoa, like, it's cold water in the face is how, people describe it. Stage 3 kidney disease is a problem for me. Then, and I'm saying, okay, I'm gonna change my diet. I'm gonna take the Genesis herbs, and let's see how this goes. If I am actively pursuing a dietary intervention or any intervention on my own, I would want to have a baseline. So before I start the intervention, and for me, I really like 90 days in and then another 90 days in. Like, I love 6 months on any intervention, because I feel like it gives time for consistency to work its magic. So, I would have at least 2, because then I also have some trends. And you can't just say, oh, well, that urine just wasn't accurate, or this just wasn't accurate. Like when you have 2 trending numbers, at least 2 trending numbers, it starts to tell the story of what's working or not working.
Yeah, no, I agree with that. I think that's, testing is our feedback, right? So, and good, accurate testing is even more important. So, yeah, otherwise, how do you know what's working? And yeah. So I totally agree with that. Okay. Is there anything else you want to say about the scientific sort of part and why it's important to kidney disease and the testing before we move on into sort of interventions? Is there anything else to say about that?
Yeah, I guess a couple other things. And again, I was just, kind of refreshing my mind on proteinuria before we hopped on. And one thing I didn't know that was new to me when I was reading through some of the review studies is your level of proteinuria can also be predictive of your risk of heart disease or cardiac event, independent of like kidney status, right? Because you can start getting into these associations, causations, etc. But there's a really, really strong association with having a lot of proteinuria and having a cardiac event. So again, heart disease or cardiac events are the number one killer for people with kidney disease, not actually kidney disease.
Yeah.
Have a family history of that. That's a especially very relevant marker to be paying attention to. Yeah. So
That's a really good point. And that's, again, something most people don't know. So yeah, if you've got your protein in the urine, you obviously know that you are at a potential risk of a faster decline of kidney disease, plus an increased risk of a cardiovascular event. So when you're seeing that, then we are looking to do some pretty big intervention and drive that level down. So moving on into intervention, what are the things someone comes in and you're like, wow, we've got protein in the urine, there's a history of cardiovascular disease with stage 3. What are you doing? What sort of plans and changes are you recommending for these people, Jessianna?
Yeah, so good question. So number 1 is obviously we're going to just take care of low-hanging fruit like nutrition.
Yeah.
So of course we do that. But no, start with like a good nutritional base, and it can be amazing the changes you see just by moving the nutrition towards a really positive place. So I'm thinking in my mind about actually one of my first patients. He was a real interesting guy, and he was a bodybuilder. I loved because he would text me like every year or so. I actually should reach out to him and see how he's doing. For every year or so, he'd give me an update. But when he came in and worked with me, he was an active bodybuilder. And so he was eating a ton of protein. He was all in the bodybuilding world in every single way. His wife was a nurse, and so he he got his labs drawn, and he's like, whoa, like my kidney function's been dropping really fast. And he had tons of protein in his urine. I can't remember how much it was, like 3,000 or something. It was crazy high.
Whoa,
I
whoa,
get
whoa.
it was a lot. So I was
Yeah.
like, hey, like number one, I know you're super into bodybuilding, but let's see if we can stabilize the kidney function, because really active, like heavy bodybuilding is, that's not ideal in the kidney space if you're in an active inflamed space, because you're breaking down a ton of muscle mass. So we started moving him towards a more plant dominant diet. And it was really interesting that, the magic of consistency over 3 months, 6 months, 9 months, 1 year, 3 years later, he continued to see this drop in his proteinuria. And all we did in his case was pull out a couple crazy supplements he was on for bodybuilding and change his nutrition plan. But we saw this, like the proteinuria just kept going down and down and down. His kidney function just kept going up and up and up. And I think he started with me, his G4 was like I have to look, but I think it was around 40. And like 3 years later, he had brought it up to over 70, which really, if he was to look at it just on muscle mass, like to do a cystatin, it was probably higher than that. Just by modifying, just on a really simple basis, the protein in his diet, the quantity, the type for him was really important. So, that's one thing. Now, protein isn't the only thing. It's easy to start thinking like, oh, there's protein in the urine, so I got to take protein out of my diet. It's not that direct, because we don't eat protein and then it directly goes into our bloodstream and then it goes to the kidneys. Our body doesn't work that way, right? It's not like the protein straw that goes into our kidneys.
No.
So, but the type of foods is, animal proteins. I'm not against animal proteins. I think they can have a ton of benefits for people with kidney disease. But, if you're pushing on a heavy inflammatory diet, if you don't have the benefit of alkalinity and those heavy plants in your diet, which helps support a lot of anti-inflammatory pathways, it helps support a lot of things, liver function, all sorts of things, then you're going to be driving that inflammatory process, period. So, moving towards that plant heavy, that alkaline diet, which, that's what we teach in our practice. That's what we see in your guys' natural kidney solution program. When you start moving there, some of that proteinuria can modify just on that factor. So that's number one. So just take care of like low-hanging nutrition. The low-hanging fruit. A couple other things you can do. If your proteinuria is being driven from an autoimmune state, a lot of proteinuria, or you see nephrotic syndrome with IgA nephropathy, getting to that deeper part of what's driving the autoimmune disease, which usually is a little bit beyond just diet, is really helpful. Some people are put on ACE inhibitors by their physician. They'll say, hey, like my blood pressure is okay, but my doctor said I should take, this medication to help with protein in my urine. And there is some, relevance to that for sure, and some science behind it. So that's often a pharmaceutical approach that is taken. And then the last thing, of course, which I'll let you speak to, would be leveraging some of the medicinal herbs that we have out there that can be really helpful.
Yeah, so there's 4 herbs, 3 that are in our kidney prime for this exact reason. So astragalus, or astragalus as we call it in Australia, but astragalus is, I think, is how you pronounce it in the US. So Chinese herb is really well known for reducing protein clearance in the urine over 24 hours. Romania, another Chinese adaptogenic kidney herb, again, it's one of our main ones in kidney prime, does the same thing. So it has been shown to reduce creatinine, improve eGFR. It's antifibrotic, which is one of the reasons we use it, but it also reduces this protein through the urine over 24 hours. And cordyceps, which is the fungus mushroom that grows up in the Himalaya. same thing, reduces protein in the urine as antifibrotic. Then a herb that is not specifically known as a kidney herb, it's very well known as a liver herb, which is Silomarum, milk thistle, or St. Mary's thistle, as we call it in Australia. That's also been shown to reduce protein in the urine. So those 4 herbs are really quite good for that. I think I read somewhere else that Schisandra might do it a little bit as well. And Schisandra works on the liver as well. It is in our kidney prime. It's adaptogenic. And I have a feeling, I'd have to go pull up the research, but I think we put in the kidney prime because it also was able to reduce protein in the urine as well. So yeah, there's some amazing herbs that absolutely will reduce that. The science behind it, we think it's probably the antioxidant effects, probably that it's protecting all of those, the 3 main herbs that we use, which is the Rehmannia, the astragalus, and the cordyceps, are antifibrotic, so which is why we love them. So they're stopping the toughness in the tissue, basically, and making it a bit more spongy, for want of a better word. And so if you get the kidney tissue functioning better, it would make sense then that you're going to have a reduced protein in the urine clearance, because the actual structure of the kidneys has improved. And so how you spoke to it about it earlier, and those herbs are anti-inflammatory as well, but that's why they'd work that way. So yeah, those herbs definitely have got scientific studies behind them.
Well, and it's actually kind of 2 birds with 1 stone, because also that protein in the urea causes some of that hardening or that fibrosis of the tissue. And so being able to backpedal that a little bit, which is always really hard, but being able to leverage some of those tools to get that tissue healthy again, and not only make so you're not having you're not having as much protein in the urine, but they're also helping that if you did have it, that it can help with some of those bad effects. So I always think that's something cool about herbs, is that they don't just do one thing. They seem to do multiple things to really boost the overall outcome.
Yeah, I love that too. But, and with anything, we say this with the program as well, you'd want to use that in conjunction with potentially, like you mentioned, increasing plants and moving away from really heavy, acid forming protein sources, because I think, there's no magic bullet. I think it all works together. But the studies did show, and the studies were independent of anyone changing their diets and things like that. But I think when you do it all together, of course, it's just going to work far more synergistically and more effectively. So
Yeah, totally agree. I think you put nutrition is just the foundation, right? Nutrition is the foundation. And sometimes you just build a house off of that. It's great, but nutrition builds the foundation, and then you start up leveling. And often you find that the tools that you've put on board, you get way, way more outcomes from them, just because you have that good foundation of good, solid nutrition.
Absolutely. Absolutely. Yeah, you can't sort of do one without the other. Well, you can, but I think it's far more effective when you do it those ways. Okay. So we've talked about treatment, we've talked about testing, we've talked about what it is. What else do people need to know about protein in urine? Anything else that we haven't covered, or that you want to mention?
I think if I were to put some takeaways, it would be, and I've mentioned this before, be your own advocate, right? But make sure that you have that as a test, even if it's just a spot you're in to start. I think that's really good. But make sure you've had that as a test, and then use that as a marker. A good question for your doctor is, what are you watching for in my urine? Like, what are the markers, and why is it important to be aware of those? That's really a great question to bring you and your doctor together on the same team. So I think, like, you get the testing, and then you make sure that it's if you're actively in an intervention, then you also make sure that you get that testing to assess your intervention. That way, if it's not working, you're like, hey, I've done all this dietary stuff, I still have tons of protein in my urine. It's not a lost cause, but it means that you can take a look at your diet and, work with an expert or a professional and say, did I miss something? What else could be going on? How else can I tackle this? And that's the magic of testing, is sometimes you do a lot and you get the results back and you're like, yes, it's working. Keep at it. And sometimes you get the results back and you're like, hey, I really thought this was going to work. I really thought I'd get an outcome. It doesn't mean that you're broken. It just means you might need to look at it from a different angle, because every body is so different. And so then you take that as a learning experience. Say, I did that, it didn't work, which is not bad. It just tells you something that didn't work so you can readjust and fine tune. But I really believe that pretty much everyone can get to a place where they find things that work for them to,
Yeah.
to get to a healthy standpoint.
I think that's a great takeaway. And I love that, asking your GP about what tests they're looking at to measure that. I think that's a really, really valuable question that anyone can take.
Yes.
Okay. Anything else you want to add before we wrap up?
No, I don't think so. I think that's good for tonight. Just keep it short and sweet on protein in the urine. But of course, drop questions, comments below, and we're happy to answer those.
Yeah, absolutely. If you, just like Jessianna said, if you have any questions about that, just ask below. It's me getting back to you. If you want to know more about Jessianna and her team, I'll put the link into her organization, but she's the Kidney Nutritional Institute.org. And then you'll find her team. She's got some great free resources on there as well that you can always download, especially just getting you started with diet and things like that you can make simple changes. If you want to know more about what we do, head to www.kidneycoach.com. Same on Facebook, TikTok, Instagram, or all over those platforms. And make sure that you hit subscribe. That way you'll get notified anytime we put up new content. And I think that's it. Jessianna, thank you so much for sharing your wisdom and covering this topic. We've had a few people ask about it, so it's really good to know. And I think the big takeaway for me was just knowing that protein in the urine is absolutely a driver potentially of more aggressive kidney disease. So make sure that your nephrologist, GP, whoever you're working with, is looking into that and you know what that is. All right, everybody. Thanks for being part of our community. Thanks again, Jessianna.
Okay.
We'll look forward to seeing you next time. Until then, bye.
Bye-bye.